Kerry Niigaan, great to have you with us again. It's been since last November that the Premier, Scott Moe, issued a news release saying he would be bringing in this Saskatchewan First Act to give Saskatchewan autonomy and exclusive jurisdiction over its natural resources. That's now passed. Niigaan, what's your reaction to this provincial legislation?
Well, what Saskatchewan's trying to do is to do an end around with the federal government, which includes the issue of First Nations rights, Indigenous and treaty rights particularly. And the problem is that when you do an end around with the Constitution, it's quite specific in Section 91(22). 24, which includes First Nations lands and territories, which is a federal obligation. And what the provincial government's trying to do is to take control of lands and resources that they claim to be provincial jurisdiction, and it just won't hold up to a Supreme Court test. However, this is an attempt by the Saskatchewan government to try to extract as much natural resources without having to do adequate compensation or consultation with First Nations. Even though they say that this legislation won't step on Indigenous and treaty rights, it's impossible to imagine how this would not be. And so this is an attempt by the Saskatchewan government, much like Alberta, to try to gain a lot of favor by treating Justin Trudeau as the enemy, and First Nations get caught in the crossfire.
Kerry, this is in your backyard. We know, of course, the FSIN has opposed this legislation. What are you hearing from reaction from Indigenous peoples out there?
The Métis Nation Saskatchewan too is also opposing the legislation. They are very vocal. They were at the legislative when the act passed, and I see a lot of court action being taken. I know the Saskatchewan government is just released its budget. We have $1 billion surplus. I'm not sure how much of that money will be tied up in the court system, because the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and Métis Nation Saskatchewan both say that they will not sit still. They will not allow this to happen. And I don't think that this act has very much to stand on. It was just, I think it's just an attempt to show that, you know, that they're fighting against the federal government, that like Niigaan had said. It's just a stab at Trudeau, and First Nations and Métis people are going to be paying the biggest price for it.
Yeah, Niigaan, you know, challenges in Alberta to their Sovereignty Act as well. Like you say, this isn't likely, it will head to the courts, but likely not hold up. Is this a waste of everyone's time and money here?
Well, it's what political games look like when it comes to a situation involving lands and resources. You know, in Ontario, I'm currently sitting in Toronto right now. There's conversations around what's called the Ring of Fire. Mm-hmm. And during the last provincial federal debate on healthcare, you actually heard a lot of provincial ministers come out and say to the federal government, stop putting red tape on us, stop putting limitations on us. We are our own sovereign provinces that can make our own decisions. Problem is that what they're really talking about is stop recognizing Indigenous rights, stop passing Bill C-15, which recognizes the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I hope the public understands what the provinces are trying to do, which is to abrogate and completely ignore Indigenous rights. Unfortunately, they have a template. The federal government was the one who were the best at this until very recently. And so the provinces really want to get First Nations rights out of the way. They don't want to consult appropriately. They just want to be able to create profit for their own communities. And the real problem, of course, is that this will all end up in the courts, and it will be a colossal waste of time because the provinces simply won't be able to do this legally.
Kerry, what more can First Nations, Indigenous peoples, Métis in the province do aside from taking this to the courts?
I think with upcoming elections, there's always this debate on whether Indigenous people should vote. And I think that any political organization, any political body responds to its constituents. If Indigenous people come out in record numbers and start utilizing the right to vote, I think maybe we will be taken seriously and not so easily sloughed off as our concerns don't matter. if we come out in droves and we actually are able to change who is elected in specific ridings, then I think it will send a strong message to the provincial government that we can't be silenced and ignored.
Kerry, Niigaan, we'll have to leave it there. Always love to see you. Niigaan, safe travels home. Have a good weekend to both of you.
Yeah, miigwechins.